Okay, well, hello and welcome to our presentation, Using Clicker to Support a Whole Class Writing Journey. So, my name is Phil, and I'll be demonstrating during today's webinar. And I'm joined by Bridget, who'll be sharing her experiences with us and discussing how Clicker might be applied to a writing journey. So I'm an education consultant at Crick Software, and I work with teachers and educational practitioners daily. Bridget is our resident content writer here at Crick Software, and her previous role was in education as an assistant principal at an outstanding primary school in Northamptonshire. She's years of experience teaching across Key Stage 2 and regularly led demonstrations of best practice in literacy for her trust. We've also got another education consultant, Joe, on hand, so he'll be answering your questions. So if you've got any questions, please use the Q&A box to send him questions and he'll answer them during the session. So first of all, welcome, Bridget.
Thanks, Phil. Thank you for having me.
No, that's a pleasure. So if we start with our overview board, perhaps you can talk us through kind of the outline of the writing journey as you delivered it.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is something that I typically would have done with my class over a series of days or even potentially weeks, because it was really important for them to develop the skills and the understanding that they needed for each specific genre that we were focusing on for our next piece of writing. So what I'll do as we go through the journey is I will quickly explain what these steps mean to me, because I suppose a lot of us will be familiar with them. We might call them different things. So when I go through them, I'll just explain what they would look like typically, and then I'll go through and explain how I would use Clicker to make it more engaging, to reduce teacher workload and to make sure the children are more confident in their writing.
Okay, perfect. Well, look, we can see that the first stage of this writing journey is text analysis. So I wonder if you could perhaps first sort of outline what you mean by text analysis and how you would have used it, and then perhaps go into some of the ways in which there were challenges there that might be dealt with by using some assistive technology like Clicker.
Absolutely. So text analysis is always where I would start, because it was an opportunity for me to immerse the children in some really good examples of best practice of the writing that we're looking at. So for our journey today, we're going to stick to the same genre to make it easier for everyone to follow along throughout the journey. So we're going to look at persuasive writing, and in particular a persuasive letter. So with a text analysis, I would provide lots of different examples of a persuasive letter, and we would go through as a class to discuss all the structural features, all the language features that they could then familiarise themselves with to make sure that they can use them in their own writing when it's their turn to write a piece at the end of the module, as it were. So it'd be very important for me to include lots of topic-specific vocabulary to make sure we're developing their vocab as we go as well.
Okay. So if I now show this document, do you want to talk?
Crick.
Oops, sorry. Do you want to talk us through what's happening here?
Absolutely. So this is an example of the sort of text analysis that I would create. It's of the standard that I would really want to inspire the children to be able to write at. So what I would do then is, as a class, we would go through and we would go paragraph by paragraph, talking through all the different features that we can see. So structural features or language features. But obviously, to understand how well they've understood the lesson, I would need to have examples where they could do paired work or independent work to demonstrate how well they've understood those features. And this is where I would start to find not difficulties, but where it being a whole class lesson with varying abilities, you start to find those differences in the sort of support children would need, because the teacher's been removed and it's now onto their paired or independent work. So typical things that I would come across is that children might start to become disengaged with the learning because there might be a particular word that they struggle to read, so they would then give up on that entire sentence, or they'd rely too heavily on the person next to them, so I wouldn't get a true representation of what every single individual could do. And this is where Clicker has some really brilliant features that can help.
Yeah, sure. So to pick up on that point, often a problem with children reading something is that they will get stuck on a particular challenging word, and that kind of breaks up their reading fluency because they then have to go and get some support in reading that word. But what you can do with Clicker is any word we're stuck on,
Biodegradable.
It will then read that back to us, so I don't have to break my concentration, my train of thought, and I can just keep that reading fluency going. Now, if I'm struggling with the sense of a whole sentence, maybe what I want to do is listen to that whole sentence. So I'm not going to make it play all of this, but you can start it playing.
Secondly, plastic is not biodegradable.
So we can then review the whole sentence, or if we want to, we could listen to whole paragraphs, or have the whole letter read to us.
Absolutely, and that's what's so great about Clicker, is because the children get to control the level of support that they want. And in a mixed ability classroom, you might have some children who can read through this perfectly fine by themselves and they really enjoy that process. There might be other children who then feel, like I say, a bit disengaged, or they lack confidence then in what the task is actually at hand, of finding those features and understanding how the structure and language works within this particular genre. But they can take that ownership back and they can, go, well, it's okay, I can read the first paragraph, but I just want help with this word, or I want help with this word. And because Clicker can provide that help, the teacher is now automatically freed up for however long this part of the session is lasting, to be able to go around and to really speak to their students and to understand how they're all getting on a one-to-one basis. Whereas before, a teacher might typically be stuck with a smaller group of children who relied on them for this reading support that Clicker can provide instead.
Fantastic. Okay, let's pop back to the overview board now. So the next section was vocabulary collection. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the natural progression for me was, once the children have experienced a full example of this genre, would be to go into the nitty-gritty and to start picking out the vocabulary that's specific for the genre itself. So for persuasive writing, we might look at things like the formal conjunctions they're using to formulate their argument. Or you might be looking at topic-specific vocabulary. So in the example that we've got, it's about, pollution, plastic pollution, so it'd be all those sorts of words. And the aim of this part of the journey is to make sure that the children finish the lesson with a list of topic or genre-specific vocabulary that they can then use in their writing. So they know they've got a bank of words that are going to be really suitable when it's their turn to do the writing themselves. So useful for scaffolding, and also useful for expanding their vocabulary. It's important for teachers to not just let children use the same words over and over and over, but to introduce them to new vocab, and that's what this lesson would do for me.
Okay, so of course, it's all very well saying, yep, Clicker can help in all these ways, but one of the ways that might be less obvious in which you can help is by actually saving teachers time in preparing these resources. So taking off from your idea of using some of this vocabulary in maybe a word bank, what we can do is just select that, and I'm going to copy all that, and then I'm going to go into Clicker set. And I'm going to create a new Clicker set, and I'm going to create a word bank, and I'm going to do this just by pasting all that text in. And I've got an option down the bottom to take out some of the more sort of high frequency words, because that maybe isn't really the focus of this. The vocabulary collection you're talking about, of course, is more specialist vocabulary. So we can put a filter on there. So look, Bridget, I'll be guided by you here. How many do you want to take out?
We'll go for the 2,000 most common words, yeah.
Okay, so that's got rid of all the high frequency words. I'm going to click OK. And you can see that just in an instant, we've actually turned all that vocabulary into a word bank. Now, you just spent a couple of minutes just tidying this up a little. So we've got the version that you just enhanced slightly here, and we're going to use that for the demonstration.
Yeah, I did it in exactly the same way. And the reason that I've done this is because typically in a very manual classroom without this sort of resource on hand, I would rely on the children to copy and handwrite these words out for themselves from a collection that we would do together on the board. So it'd be very typical for me to have that original text out in front of all the children, and us to go through and say, right, let's read this sentence. In this sentence, which words are genre specific or topic specific? And we would generate this list. And, it's great to have that communication while you're doing it, but relying on the children to then copy down those words can create a couple of issues, because children write at different paces. Some can copy much more accurately than others. It introduces lots of opportunities for children to, unfortunately, make spelling mistakes that they would then carry through every time they use this word bank in later pieces of work. And all those put together could make them quite disengaged in a lesson potentially, or it would just limit their outcome that they would otherwise be able to achieve, because this lesson is about vocabulary collection, but also, you know, understanding it and making sure that they can understand how to use those words or the meaning of the words, so that when they come across the word environment in their word bag, they go, oh, I remember that conversation we had, I know exactly what that means, rather than I remember copying that from the board. So it just gives the teacher more space to spend more quality time using the lesson to go through what does this vocabulary mean and how are we going to use it in our writing later on.
Yeah, and I think you said something very important there. It's not about the copying. Copying didn't come into the learning objectives for this lesson, and yet if you're not using a tool like Clicker, then you can end up putting the focus on the copying rather than the actual learning objective.
And I would spend a lot of time going through 30 sheets of paper correcting all the spelling mistakes, which is now a job that I don't have to do at the end of the day, because I know that they're all going to have access to a very accurate word bank that they can all use at a click of a button, you know, in their own writing later on.
Okay, right, so let's go back to our overview. So we've done vocabulary collection. So the next section was about sentence development. So can you talk us through how you did this without Clicker and how you might incorporate Clicker?
Yeah, so this step for me, sentence development, it could also be called like a technique development maybe, but the idea is that it's a sentence by sentence focus. So rather than expecting the children to write a big section of text in a lesson, I might only expect them to write maybe 5 or 6 sentences, but they need to demonstrate a particular skill or a particular technique that they need to show in this genre specific focus. So one that I'm using today for an example is the different purposes of conjunctions. So in an argument, you need to have conjunctions that you use to explain and conjunctions that you have to expand ideas. And if you're trying to write a persuasive letter, you need to make sure you're using those in the right way, otherwise your argument doesn't make sense. It's not going to have very much weighting. So this would be the sort of technique that I would look at and focus on with the children. So typically it would be I would model some sentences first and show them exactly what it is that is expected of them. And then we'd go into doing that together as a class and building their confidence, doing it as a shared activity, and then finishing as always with some independent work so that I can then go and check how every individual has understood the task. And it's great. Some children absolutely flourish doing that manually with a paper and pencil, and that's all great. But for some children, it can be a bit of cognitive overload almost, because they're having to take a beginning part of a sentence, copy that, take a conjunction. Is it the right one? Is it not? They haven't really figured it out yet because they're so busy trying to write it all down. So I've got an example of a document, Phil, where I've got some sentences that I can basically share to make this clearer for everyone.
Okay.
So this might be my modelled version where I write these with my class. So I have a main clause at the beginning, and we could discuss, you know, is it going to be a because or a so? And then we would finish the sentence together. But when it's their turn, I like to provide them with kind of stem sentences so that to take a bit of that cognitive load away. So for this, I've used a Clicker Connect set. And without this Clicker Connect set, I would have typed these up like this, but I would have had to have printed it out and then trimmed them all and then handed them all out to all the kids, and they'd be sat there on the desk, you know, moving them all around and maybe having to get a glue stick out, can't find the glue stick, stick it in the book. So it's all just a lot neater and a lot more time effective for me, but also it's easier for the kids because being a word processor, they can chop and change this around as many times as they like before they settle on their final answer. So I thought it'd be nice if we demonstrate doing one of these sentences now to show how it works.
Go for it.
So if we could, well, if we wanted to listen to it to check, you know, here are main clauses, we can do that. But if we pick the first one, so plastic causes a life-threatening risk to marine animals, great. That's now inputted, so my children now no longer need to worry about handwriting that and getting that down. They can now focus on which conjunction they'd like to use. So I have color-coded my conjunctions based on their purpose, because that's, you know, the main function of the lesson is to really understand the difference between these two types of conjunction. So we've got because, since, and due to all in one color because they all do a similar thing, and the same with the next column being in pink. If we decide that we want to do a cause and effect, let's go with the conjunction so we can pop that in. And again, what we've done then, very quickly, the children now focusing on the part of the lesson, which is, how does this conjunction work? So what sort of ending do I need to have for this sentence to make sense? So what we could do is if the children wanted more support, they could open their word bank and have that available to them as well, because now we're kind of doing our free writing.
Okay.
And we could say something like, plastic causes a life-threatening risk to marine animals, so it is important. And if we wanted to, I guess we could have Clicker's predictor on as well to show how that looks. We might use that later in our drafting.
Okay, so let's pop the predictor on. So, sorry, what did you say? So
it is important.
It is important. Oh yeah, look, I've only got as far as I am, and already I can check.
Important.
Yeah, that's what I want.
That you.
That you, and you can see how the predictor here is massively speeding up the entry. Yeah.
Change your ways.
Oh, change. Yep. Your ways. Actually, we'll have ways. Yeah.
To protect them. And I think protect is also in our word bank if we wanted to get that one from there.
Okay. So, yeah, to protect them. Fine. Okay.
Plastic causes a life-threatening risk to marine animals, so it is important that you change your ways to protect them.
That's great. And I ought to say that if it's speaking too quickly or too slowly, that's something that you can adjust as well, depending on who it is that you're working with. Okay. Did you want to say any more on that? Shall we go to planning now?
No, let's move on to planning. Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Okay. So the next section is planning. So look, talk us through that.
It's quite self-explanatory. I'm sure we're all very familiar with the idea of planning writing, but I'm really excited about showing this part of Clicker because I so wish that I could just get this out everywhere, because it's just such a brilliant tool, because I think planning is actually quite a complex task to ask children to do. And so I'm really excited to show how Clicker can make it far more accessible to absolutely everyone and make it far more enjoyable as well for a lot of the students who would otherwise find planning quite difficult potentially. So the aim of planning is, you know, the children have a structure and content to their writing ahead of when they do their first draft, and it provides the opportunity for them to, you know, avoid that forgetfulness and avoid not having any ideas later down the line. And ideally they're going to plan their key content of, you know, facts, vocabulary, statistics and things, because this is a persuasive piece of writing. But it gives all children access to scaffolding that will remove those barriers during the writing process later. So typically for me, this would have looked like another manual piece of work in terms of pen, paper, pencils, whatever. And I always found that some children were quite daunted by the process of being given, okay, it had boxes on it and it had a nice little flow chart, kind of let's move through here. But it was just a lot of white paper. And for children who maybe don't write down their ideas as well as they could speak their ideas or share their ideas, for them, it's not a very enjoyable task necessarily. And they might not always understand their notes when they look back at them later anyway, because it's not how they would choose to collate their ideas. So if we could use Clicker instead and demonstrate how we could plan with Clicker, that would be great. So I have got a pre-made board, but I know also we've got one in Learning Grids that we can show.
Yeah, so I'll just to mention one of the best things about Clicker. So I know some of you joining this webinar have already got Clicker, and it's possibly new to some others of you. So for those who are not familiar with Clicker, one of the best things about Clicker is we've got over 3,000 free resources on Learning Grids, and we're updating and increasing that bank all the time. And these are, you've got lots of different types of resources, and you can filter by these on the left. You've got resources that span right across the curriculum. But if you're looking for something specific, then you can type that in. So if we were doing some persuasive writing, we wanted a persuasion planner, you can put that into your search box at the top, and the first hit is this persuasion planner here, and I believe it's this one that you based your customized one on. So
yeah, and so it took me minutes to put together, because obviously all of that was already in place. So if we do open my persuasion planner at the bottom, so you can all have a look at it, this is one that I would show to my class to model what theirs could look like. But importantly, like I mentioned before, you know, I'm quite okay with making all my notes written down to look back at them later. But for some children, they'd be better off speaking their notes or having images to prompt them. And we can add those into these Clicker boards as well. So the children don't have to rely on their plan on being really confident writers, because that's not what this lesson's about. This lesson isn't about how well can you write a plan, it's about how well can you plan. So we could have all these voice notes available to them so they can listen back to their plan later on and put as much detail into that as they need to make sense of it for when it's their turn to draft write. And I think this just builds a lot of confidence for the children for when they come to writing, because they know they're going to understand all of their ideas. And like I say, they can have those images in there as well if they want for extra prompts. And the better they plan, the more likely it is that they're going to improve their writing outcomes when they come to doing their first draft.
Brilliant. Okay, right. Well, I think we're on our last tab now, which is drafting. So what's your approach to drafting without Clicker, and how does that approach change when you've got Clicker at your disposal?
For this whole writing journey, I'm used to having drafting available at each point. So the children would draft their sentence development sentences before they wrote them into their literacy book, because I always thought it was, it's quite unfair to ask children to do their best writing straight away. I know I don't do my best writing straight away. So having that capacity to draft and have a go at it beforehand is really important. So drafting for me would actually be its own separate book, where they could just focus on content, vocabulary and grammar, not on presentation, not on any of that, just really all about what am I writing, how am I writing it? And then they would write up their draft into their literacy book afterwards, and then they would focus on their presentation and their handwriting. And it worked really well. Children started to develop that really important tool of being able to check, edit and improve, which is a very important skill to develop. And it's why drafting, I suppose, is such an important part of this journey. But it did bring its own challenges, shall we say, because for some children, and I think as an adult I'll probably ask the same question, which is, why do I need to write the same thing twice? If I've written it in my draft book, why do I need to write it up again? And especially for children who might not have that handwriting automaticity that would make that an easy task for them, what you're sometimes asking is for the children who find writing more difficult, you're asking them to do even more writing. And I think that can create a bit of a barrier for them into enjoying the subject. And in turn, it will have a negative impact on their engagement and maybe even then their outcomes as well. So I'm really excited to show how Clicker can help with the drafting process for all students. So I have got a draft that I've started as if I were a student in my class.
Okay. Here we go. Yeah.
So what's great about this is that I can have my persuasion planner from previously. I can have that inserted as an image at the top if I want to, or I can flip back to and from it. So I have everything in one place. I have my word banks from earlier. So I have all my vocabulary available to me as well. I also have the predictor if I want. So all the things that I'm asking the children to focus on in terms of content, punctuation and grammar, it's all here in one place for it to be the true focus of the lesson. And I think what I'm used to is seeing lots and lots of little stars around draft books. Phil, I don't know whether you remember the same sort of thing, where if you were writing a sentence and you've forgotten something, you put a little star and number it 1, and then you'd have to go to the next page and look back. Being a word processor, children can edit as they go. So I thought it'd be nice for us to write a sentence and then show how Clicker encourages them to edit as they go. So if we could start with, and we're going to use our direct appeal here and start with the word you. So you must take responsibility.
Okay.
And I think if we go to our first paragraph 1 tab, we have some of the vocabulary in there. Yeah.
Okay. So, you must take. Oh, we've got responsibility there.
Yeah. Because, so we use one of our conjunctions that we've learnt from our previous part of the journey. Your company contributes. We've got contributes in our word bank as well if we want it. It's just hiding behind your, there we are.
There we are, yeah.
To the 8 million tonnes of plastic in the ocean.
The 8
million.
And of course, if I can't read any of those words at the bottom, you just right click on them and Clicker will speak them to you. So 8 million tonnes, yeah.
Of plastic in the ocean.
of plastic in the ocean.
And when you put in that full stop, Phil, this is how it's going to encourage children to check as they go.
You must take responsibility because your company contributes to the 8 million tons of plastic in the ocean.
And what I often say about that is, I mean, I'm guilty of this. When I do when I write an email, I'll always check it before I send it. But when I read it back, just to myself in my head, I read back what I meant to write, not what I've actually put in the email. But if you hear voice feedback giving you a chance to review the sentence, it stands out straight away if it's not as you intended it.
It's just giving the children every opportunity to be successful in their writing, because I know the amount of times I would stand at the front of a lesson and walk around the class as they're doing their independent writing. Remember, you're checking, keep checking your work. You know, I can't check everything for you all the time. You know, all these things that you just so typically say. But this really encourages children to check as they go, because each time they put in their full stop, they hear the sentence back. And that's also a really good reminder to use full stops, because if you haven't heard Clicker talk to you for a while, it means you haven't been putting them in. So it's just such a useful tool for children to build, you know, it builds confidence with every single sentence. Each sentence they hear back that sounds great, they go, yeah, let's do the next one. And it avoids me then at the end, when I check all the drafts, having to sit and go through reams and reams of handwritten work that's scribbled and messy, because we said to the kids, it isn't about presentation, it's about the content, and we're following all the little star systems. You know, I have some really clear documentation in front of me that I can read, that the children can then really clearly write up from later as well. And what's also great is that I don't miss out on their writing journey of how they've written this either, because we have Clicker Analytics. So if I want to have a look at how they've put this together, I still get that same information.
Yeah, so this is this was new in the latest version of Clicker, and this is a great tool to allow you as a teacher to understand exactly how a child has put together a piece of writing. So you'll see on the left-hand side, we've got a kind of overview of the whole document, but it's all color coded, and the different colors obviously mean different things. So first of all, the black section, which makes up 47 out of the 79 words written, those are great. Those are the successes. These are all the words that that child managed to input without any assistance. Okay, but we've got other sections. So you can see the precious there is in red, and I can get to the spelling by just clicking on it or clicking to the spell check tab, and we can see that they had an interesting attempt at trying to spell precious there. They use speech, which is really good. They're using the support available to themselves, and then they're using that to correct it to precious. You've got all the words that came in from the predictor. And just a little aside, you can copy that list out. I know lots of teachers will then send that home. That's your spelling list for next week. It's a great way of homing in on some of the vocabulary that a particular individual is finding challenging. And the last thing is the blue, and those are the words that have come out of the Clicker set that we were using, that word bank. Okay, right. Well, look. We've reached the end now, so that's been absolutely fantastic, Bridget. Thank you so much for first sharing with us all the all the stages of the writing journey that, as you said at the outset, and I sort of echo this as well. It was very, very successful. It worked well for you, but there are so many areas which we could be tightened up and where children were perhaps pulled away from the core task at hand rather than actually focusing in on the learning objectives for the lesson. So that's been fascinating. So thank you so much for that, Bridget. And I want to thank everyone who's joined us today. We've received lots of questions. Joe's been busy typing away answers to you all. I'll actually leave the session open for a couple of minutes after we finish, just so that if you've got any final questions you need to ask, you can access those. So what happens next? So in the next couple of days, we're going to be sending across the recording of today's session. So if you want to review anything that we've gone through, if you want to share it with colleagues, then please feel free to do that. So we'll be sending you a link to the recording. And then I guess there's a couple of other things that you might want to do, depending on whether you've already got Clicker or whether you're new to Clicker. So I know that quite a few people that registered for today's webinar have already got Clicker, and it might be that you've learned something today and thought, oh, that'd be really interesting. I'd really like some more information about how I could apply that in my particular situation. And if you'd like to do that, can I encourage you to jump onto our training resources page, go to the clicker and go to the clicker section of the training hub. And if you scroll to the bottom, there's a link there that allows you to book a customer care meeting. So that'll be a short meeting with one of our education consultant colleagues that will be able to give you some really valuable hints and tips about how to get the absolute most out of your clicker subscription. Now, some of you that are coming along to today's webinar have not currently got clicker. So if you'd like to have like a personalized demonstration that's going to show the aspects of clicker, because clicker does lots of things, but we want to show the aspects of clicker that's going to have the biggest impact in your particular situations, then head over to our clicker page from the front screen and then just go to free demo, and you can just click on the area of the country that's applicable to you, or if you're outside the UK, there are some links there, and we'll organize a personalized demonstration for you there. So with that, I'm going to finish. So thank you so much, Bridget, for all your input. That was brilliant. And thank you so much for those of you that came to watch this webinar. I'm going to close it now, but I'll leave the actual webinar running just for a couple of minutes in case you've got any final questions before we log off. Okay, thank you very much.